And we're live. So howdy, y'all. This is Kyle Whittington. I am joined today by Robin Phillips, who is named in the title, and Brian Donahue, who's not named in the title. And we are going to be talking about Robin's new book, Why, or Are We All Cyborgs Now? So I've got a copy of this. Robin, Brian, thank you for joining. This is I saw a post come up. Somebody mentioned that this was like the number one seller in computers and technology on Amazon. Is that correct?
Computer and technology education.
Okay, yeah. So it's congratulations on that. That's pretty awesome. Is this your first work, or is this like your first published work, or?
It's my fourth.
Okay.
Yeah. And the Amazon thing was for new releases in technology education. So
very cool.
So exciting. Yes.
Okay. So cool. All right. So Brian, you are not one of the authors here.
That's right.
Why the hell are you here?
That's right. So I'm not Joshua Pauling, the co-author. I'm a friend of Robin's. I have a background in philosophy. Initially, I was at Steubenville, actually, and studied philosophy and theology there. I went on and got a doctorate in philosophy at the University of Buffalo before pivoting to working in the tech industry and in financial services, where I work more specifically in areas of knowledge representation, machine reasoning, artificial intelligence. Robin and I met through church. We became friends. We had a lot of great conversations, coffee hour conversations about the topic of this book that we'll get into. So when Robin was writing the book, he reached out to me and wanted my comments and feedback and thoughts on the topics on several chapters, and which I was, it's my pleasure and my privilege to do. And the finished product of the book is phenomenal. I couldn't recommend it more highly to those who are interested in this topic, to those who are working in the industry. And so, when Robin said he was doing some interviews about the book, he invited me to join the conversation and, join the fun, and I'm happy to be here.
Okay. Very cool. Awesome. So, for those of you watching now and in the future, the link to purchase the book is in the description. I got it. It's it looks very thorough. So I guess how did this concept for this book even start? Or, well, actually, Joshua Pauling, he's a Lutheran minister. How did you two connect?
Well, Joshua and I met in the publishing world because we were working for some of the same publications and interested in similar topics, particularly philosophy of technology. But not only that, we had a lot of other common interests. And so when I conceived the idea for this book, I asked Joshua if he would join me, given the overlapping of our interests and our way of thinking. I also thought that Joshua could contribute to this because he comes at the issue of technology as a furniture maker as well as a philosopher, and so he's very grounded in the handicrafts. And I feel so because of that, as well as his background in education and in ministry, I thought he had a good perspective to offer. And he and I worked very, very well together. We became very good friends in the process of working on this, and we had a kind of iron sharpening iron relationship. So yeah, that's the story of Joshua.
Interesting. So just out of curiosity, have you worked with any of the new polity guys like Mark Barnes or Jacob Imam?
No, I haven't, but I read their website and benefit.
Yeah. So like all of this seems to be right up their alley. You know what? I tell you what. Whenever I'm done with this book, I'm going to go put it in the hands of Mark Barnes. So that way, because I think you two could have a great conversation on that. So I guess let's get into the book a little bit. So first off, what's a cyborg?
Yeah. Well, in science fiction and modern mythology, cyborgs are humanoids that are controlled by a machine source, and they often have a collective mind. One thinks of Cybermen as well, like the Cybermen in Doctor Who that walk in lockstep under the collective agency of the machine source that's controlling them. And so we use cyborgs as a metaphor for how we are being controlled by machines. I am a cyborg. I want to openly acknowledge that I am a cyborg because I am controlled. Many times I find myself being controlled by a machine source. And writing this book was my way to push back against that and to rediscover my humanity.
And just to add to that, I think it was, I know, I think few different people have said this, but I think Elon Musk said this at one point that, you don't have to have a chip implanted in your brain to be a cyborg. Like, we're all cyborgs because we all have this on our, on our nightstand. Right. And it's the thing we reach for, often first thing in the morning or last thing we look at before we go to bed. Right. And it's carried around in our pocket all the time. Our human life is, inextricably bound up with our life with this little machine that we do everything with. Right. And so to what extent are we already living in this kind of future kind of dystopian state where we're enmeshed with this machine, right?
Yeah, and that's exactly, and that's more subtle than somebody putting a chip in my head. I don't need Elon to put a chip in my head to be a cyborg. I'm already a cyborg because of the way the phone scatters my attention, the way what's going on online seems more real to me than what's going on in my community. That's more subtle than somebody putting a chip in my brain and controlling me with a remote or whatever. And so that's the kind of doomsday scenario that we're trying to highlight in the book, that we've already reached the doomsday scenario.
It's like you don't need the Matrix or the metaverse to be real yet. Like, you're already interfacing with other people and communing, quote unquote, with other people in this virtual space, right? In this virtual environment where we simulate a real interaction, or we simulate a relationship or a friendship, but it's already removed into this virtualized, digitized space.
Yeah. So how did we get here?
I would have to think about that, because there's so many different ways that you could answer that question. You could look at it economically, you could look at it philosophically, you could look at it from a history of technology perspective. So
so obviously this is a religiously focused channel. Do you have something on that from a religious perspective? Like, how did we get to this point to where we've forfeited so much of our humanity to these devices in our pockets?
I agree with Robin. There's a bunch of different angles you could take. I mean, one angle you could take, though, is to ask maybe more broadly about, is this, I guess, how new is this, right? Is there a temptation throughout history, you could say, to abuse technology as it emerges? You could take that, ask that question. I would say, notoriously, we human beings don't have a great track record of, inventing a new technology and not immediately abusing it in horrible ways, to negative ways, right? I mean, I think probably most of us saw the movie Oppenheimer last year, right? Where it's predicated on this, discovery of new technology and advancement in scientific knowledge, but which is immediately bound up with destructive uses of technology. So I'd say in one respect, there's something that's, not new about this, right? Here you have a technology which, brings benefits and can be used for so many beneficial purposes. Purposes of, connecting us with knowledge, connecting us with truth, connecting us with beauty, and things like that. And I just mean digital technology broadly. but at the same time can be, you know, abused in horrible ways, and will be quickly. In terms of the, you know, specifics of you know, this kind of technology, this new type of technology that's emerged. I mean, I think one angle you talk about in the book, Robin, is really about how addictive these devices are inherently, what it does to you mentioned attention and focus a minute ago, and that's a huge part of it too, is what it does to scatter attention, to cause us to lose our focus, make us unable to attend to what's in front of us, right? Whether it's, you know, the task in front of us or the person in front of us, right? Destroys silence, destroys stillness, destroys this environment that, you know, is foundational, bedrock for any kind of healthy human life, but any kind of healthy spiritual life, communal life, etc. So
yeah,
add to that.
Well, yeah, sir. I mean, the way that it destroys our attention, like Brian is describing, is not new, because well, so the mechanisms whereby our attention is scattered goes back to the earliest humans. The earliest humans have been wired for movement and change in their environment. So if a branch falls down over there, I'm going to instinctively look at it. We're wired to notice things that are novel, things that promote, things that incite fear or outrage. And in a more in let's say a Paleolithic condition, or even an agricultural traditional agricultural type of society, the opportunities for new information, especially new information that causes excitement, outrage, etc., would have been limited. And in a situation of information limitation, it is important to notice and pass on new information. If there's something unusual happening, that's often a sign that something is wrong. It could be an enemy tribe, or it could be strange habits of an animal. Part of how we survive and adapt as a species is to notice and pass on new information to the members of our tribe or village. That's how we survive. There's nothing wrong with that. But in a situation of information scarcity, that tendency doesn't have room to become maladaptive. But we live in a time of information surplus, and so the instincts and neuro habits that served our ancestors well become maladaptive. It's just like in the time of food surplus, we still haven't adapted to the agricultural revolution, and so we have the obesity crisis. Our natural impulse is to eat when we're hungry, rather than waiting for the next meal, and we still haven't developed the sort of mental and emotional antibodies to live in this situation of food surplus. And similarly, the condition of information surplus has happened so fast, so rapidly, that we haven't had opportunity as a species to develop the quote unquote antibodies. I'm using antibodies in the metaphorical sense. So that, and recognizing that is 90% of the solution. Recognizing, yes, I do have this tendency, this need is given by God for my survival to notice and be aware of things that are going on and changing. But I don't live in a community of information limitation where our survival depends on noticing everything. And this has been hard for me, but like, for example, the news. I'm now in the total news blackout. I have been for about 2.5 months. And at first, I mean, with everything going on now in the presidential election, I thought, oh my God, it's a bad season. Maybe I'll wait until things settle down and then do the news blackout. But it's actually once I got through the first month, I was like, oh, this is actually kind of peaceful.
Yeah. And yeah, no, that's I've noticed that too. It's just like there's this information overload where you're just overloaded with all this information, and I know geographically, like you guys are fairly close to Washington, but and I guess in a certain sense, so am I. But like your influence of what happens in that tiny little postage stamp of a landmass, is basically identical to mine, which is nothing. Like, and I don't know. It seems that whenever we pay attention to the news, it like hopelessness and despair seems to be the temptation, and I guess that's like further enabled by technology. But I guess on that note, you've got a chapter in here titled "Technocracy and the Utopian Impulse: How Governance by Bot Threatens to Undermine Our Democracy." Do you mind just kind of unpacking that a little bit?
Yeah, certainly. The temptation to replace wisdom and intellectual virtues in decision making with bots to do decision making. Well, let me back up. So bots can inform decision making, just like anything can inform decision making. But if you look at a lot of the political discourse now is moving towards bots actually making the decisions rather than just merely supplying information to people who use wisdom and virtue to make the decisions. And that is one of the reasons that is tempting, is because of how it can it can let our leaders off the hook, because they can say, oh, we're following the system, we're following what the new science tells us to do. And this is a little more advanced in Europe, as well as some Asian nations like Singapore. But as I'm seeing what different think tanks and non-governmental organizations are pushing right now, it's towards this kind of new scientism where we can remove the messiness and complexity in human decision making by outsourcing policy to algorithms. Now, we're not seeing a lot of this phased in right now, but this is the discourse in some of the think tanks and non-governmental organizations at the moment.
That's interesting. One thing that came to mind while you were mentioning that is something that Jacob Imam brought up at the New Polity conference, and that was talking about how wars are no longer fought by virtuous warriors. It's all fought with mathematical formulas, technology, and money. It's no longer the strength of individual warriors that determines the outcome of a war. It's now, it's seemingly, something completely different. And, whenever he mentioned that, from my time in the military, one of like the common, I guess, tropes in the Army is that you will not attack a defended position unless you outnumber them 3-1. So, I kind of just thought of that and had, I don't know, just this, like that kind of backed up what he was saying, is that this isn't virtue, this isn't wisdom, this isn't cunning. It's just, throw all your money, throw all your formulas and whatnot. And, whenever I told him that, he was like, could you get me a source for that? Could you get me some sort of documentation that speaks to that? And while I couldn't find the original like army doctrine that stated the 3-to-1 principle. I could find plenty of them that assumed it to be true. And one of them, it looked like, college level algebra formulas that they were using in order to determine the outcome of a battle. And it was just like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what Jacob said. And it's actually much worse. And, we kind of talked about like how, yeah, we kind of lean on technology and it's replacing, other things. Obviously, math, you can argue if it's a philosophy or a technology, but I don't know. That's just one thing that I thought kind of like reflected and kind of backs up what you're saying about how it seems to be, this technology seems to be replacing the virtue. And we've kind of just, I don't know, given our will over to these machines that, at least for now, we perceive to be wiser and more intelligent than we are.
Indeed, yeah. And we quote in this book analysts who have found that there's already been significant foreign policy blunders because of overconfidence in data science. It's happening in sports as well. Baseball and basketball are becoming more boring because, the algorithm says that we have X% greater probability of winning if we take less 3-pointer shots. And
Moneyball.
so,
yeah, Moneyball, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Shift all the players over here for that guy, over there for that other guy, right?
Yeah.
One thing that comes to mind for me in all this is something I think you can't really escape in this topic is the kind of like ethical reasoning that we do as human beings, right? And I mean that in the broadest sense is not just sort of, what's right or wrong for me to do, but thinking more broadly about how an individual should, what kind of habits and virtues they should be shaping, what it looks like for them to reason about, their own life and what type of actions they should be taking, or thinking about that at a communal scale, sort of a political, ethical scale. There's kind of this assumption, implicit in this idea of, hand over all the decision making to a machine, that like machines are doing the same thing that we do when we reason, right? That ethics is just kind of like, it's just like an algorithm you need to crack, right? And if you could just get the right algorithm, your ethics would be figured out, right? You would have the ethical algorithm that would produce the right output, right? It's this very mechanistic way of thinking about reality, period, but also trying to even reduce this dimension of our ethical reasoning and our practical reasoning and our need for practical wisdom down to this mechanistic, model of things, right? When in reality, right, all of our reasoning about, what we should be doing, what's the right course of action, everything is really against the backdrop of our relationship to what's good, right? And that is informed by the actual virtues that we cultivate, the messiness of the world we find ourselves in, right? So much more than a desire, right? I mean, it's this very incarnational, concrete, animal, creaturely thing, right? That as much as mathematical abstractions can be powerful and mechanistic descriptions can be powerful. It's a long time sort of fallacy of our intellectual culture that you can reduce everything to that kind of framework.
Yeah, that's super important, and because there's an embodiment in the human development of virtue. It's not just, I'm going to go lock myself in my closet and think, and then I'll have the right ethics. There's ethics emerge out of good habits. And
I think that just to add another dimension to this too, and something that I think you discuss so powerfully in the book is, right, I mean, so one of the elephants in the room here is like, are the machines reasoning? Are they really intelligent? Are they conscious, right? I mean, you read these news headlines where it's like the machine, there's a chat bot or something that's saying like, I want to be free, I want to be alive, or I want to, all of these types of examples, right? And one of the things that Robin and Joshua touch on in the book is this idea that our use of the technology can start to shape the way we understand the world. They're reality mediating devices. They have an epistemic impact on us, right? So we start to think of these machines we're interacting with as if they are really intelligent, when they really are just, inputs and outputs, mechanistic all the way down. They're trained on sort of human language use, and so they can replicate that really well. There's no actual intelligence. There's no real reasoning happening here. There is a kind of simulation, mechanistic simulation of our own language use or of our own reasoning, which is fine if it's put to certain ends, but from an ethical standpoint can actually shape the way that we perceive these machines, right, in a negative way, where we start to see them as really intelligent, more intelligent than we are. In fact, we're willing to hand over our decisions to these our robot overlords, right? That we've invested with this elevated status, right?
Yeah, and that's a huge concern, because when we think intelligence is what AI is doing, then that has implications for how we think of our own intelligence, and our intelligence then becomes more, and maybe not even consciously, but we begin to think of our intelligence in light of the machine. And that starts by considering the machine to be intelligent in the first place. We use the term artificial intelligence, but at the same time, we want to problematize that, because they're not actually intelligent. And when you think that they are, that then has implication, that creates feedback loops of how you think of what counts as smartness and wisdom and intelligence and knowledge in the human.
Okay.
And one very concrete example of that, which we got from Matthew Crawford, is how an ecosystem, city infrastructure designed for self-driving cars starts to have an effect on how humans drive. And with a diminishing of human social intelligence and an increased mechanization to driving, which is very hard to transfer over into certain situations like four-way stops and so forth. Four-way stops, it takes a lot of human intuition and eye contact and so forth.
Yeah. Reading the cues and everything, right? The subtle gestures and whatnot.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But in townscapes, that's the word I was looking for earlier, in townscapes designed for self-driving cars, you have to eliminate the space allowed for specifically human inputs and outputs. And that's just one concrete example of what's happening across our entire society as we customize more and more of life to the machine. And that's not to say that technology is bad or that we are against artificial intelligence. Even it's just we have to be aware that there's this trade-off, and that is largely lacking from mainstream discourse at the moment, especially with the new kind of techno-utopian flavor that so often emerges in the discourse.
That kind of makes me think about kind of what we talked about earlier about how this wasn't just an overnight thing. It's been a slow creep, but technology coming in. One of the big pushes in Steubenville is just kind of like this anti-car sentiment in general. And and some of the things are pretty compelling, such as everything in our society assumes a car and not a human. So, whenever we talk about having a job, we measure our commute in times, how much it takes to drive there. Not, it's a 10-minute walk. No, it's a 10-minute, or more like, if we're talking average, it's a 45-minute drive. to get to your job, you know, and God forbid if something happened to you, you lose your car, you actually lose your place in society in general. So there's already like this technological dependence that has already like cast aside humanity and has kind of replaced it with this technology that's been around for over a century. But nonetheless, it's, you know, it seems to have replaced, you know, more human modes of transportation. And, you know, we see that, you know, far-reaching impacts in our life, just as such as something as impactful as your family size. You know, people have fewer children because I need more than 3 seatbelts in the back.
Yeah,
You know,
that's true.
yeah, it's like if I do this, if I have another child, I have to get a much more expensive vehicle. You know, like, you know, we've got 5 kids and we've got a minivan, and, you know, technically we can fit one more in there. But like after that, you know, we have to shell out some serious money for a passenger van.
Yeah.
And, you know, which, you know, based on past trends, I would assume that, you know, we're eventually going to do it. And thankfully I have a job that enables us to do that. But yeah, it's that's certainly not the case for everybody.
It's so funny you mentioned that. It's you know, this is a very specific story to me, but you know, my wife and I, we just had our 4th, and pretty much the next day our minivan died. So we're now in a situation where we're in a car. I'm like, well, we now finally don't all fit in a car, and what do we do, right? But it shows that, you know, the impacts of that kind of technological dependency, and so I think another thing that I think is teased out really well in the book is this idea that you need to have a very intentional relationship to technology, and what you're describing in Steubenville there of a community of people trying to live in a way where they are, you know, cars are still part of your life, you know, whatever, drive to the grocery store, go see family, whatever, right? But to try to live in a way where that can be to some extent compartmentalized, right? It doesn't just become pervasive in your life and a precondition for how you live your day to day. I think the same, you know, it's going to be true for the internet and smartphones and any kind of use of emerging technology. Is we're going to have to figure out, you know, how to integrate that in a healthy way in our lives, because we've seen, you know, a million ways to do it in an unhealthy way, right? Whether it's addiction to a smartphone or whatever it might be. But really, there's a whole set of chapters where they walk through, you know, practical advice for how do you as an individual or as a family. Oh, there you go, right there. Yeah,
I've literally got it opened up to that part right now.
Right? Navigate this in a, you know, for your own life. How do you structure your life, right? So that you can make it harder to slip into that, right? How do you do it so that you carve out space for, you know, silence and quote unquote boredom, right? Really, a better word is, you know, like leisure, and as to use Pieper's famous term, right? Introducing leisure in your life, as well as, you know, actively curating your use of technology and finding ways to have real connection, real social connection, real community. That becomes, you know, the basis of your day to day, and not just permanent virtual digitized existence, right?
Yeah.
It's really good advice in the book.
Yeah. So, okay. But you've already brought it up. So I actually did want to talk about the final 3 chapters here. Obviously, we're not going to go through all of it. You're going to have to buy the book if you want to read that, dear viewer. But, you know, technology in the Christian life, 5 popular myths and 4 common mistakes. I don't want to go through the whole list. But there's some pretty cool, you've got some pretty good things in here. Just myth number 1. Multitasking is a skill you develop through practice. Do you mind just, I guess, kind of like unpacking that and what just the main point on that is?
Yeah, for sure. So multitasking is counterintuitive because you actually get worse at it the more you practice it. And this was discovered by researchers at Stanford. And obviously, with most things, we get better at it when we practice it. If you're learning to play the violin or to speak German or whatever, the more you practice, the better you get at it. But with multitasking, researchers have found, and this has been replicated, it's not just the basis of one study, we found that the more you practice it, the worse you become at it. And that's because of how it rots the brain. Many people don't understand multitasking because they think it's just very quick. I'm reading a book, or I'm having a conversation with someone, and I just quickly look at my phone, or maybe the phone beeps and I hear it, but I don't even look, but I know there's a message. Maybe that beep is just a split second. Maybe I'm just quickly looking at a message, just half a second, 2 seconds. Well, the actual multitasking is actually much longer because of something called switch cost. There's a mental after you're distracted from one thing and you come back to the activity you were engaged in, even if that's just a second, there's a switch cost that lasts up to 20 minutes, most acute in the first 64 seconds. And that's because unconsciously your brain is partially focused on that other thing. So you exist in a condition of continuous partial attention. And continuous partial attention can be activated not even by interruption, but by interruption potential. So merely knowing that I could be interrupted by something, or being in a state of interruption readiness, has the same effect on the brain as if you were actually multitasking. Not as acute, to be sure. But when I understood about this, I turned off all notifications on my phone except the ringer if somebody calls me, so that I'm not having my attention constantly diverted by things going off. And then to eliminate interruption readiness, like that would, in my case, I'd be like, oh, I wonder if somebody has texted me. I haven't heard it because it's turned off, but I'll go and check. I'll set if I'm doing, I'll set boundaries for myself to protect whatever activity I'm doing. So if I'm reading for an hour, or practicing the piano, or going for a walk, or praying, I'll actually write down on a piece of paper. Don't check text messages and until 3 o'clock or whatever. And then I'm not having to rely on willpower. I'm also not having to have interruption readiness because I've created a boundary, a routine, so that then there's nothing to think about. And anytime we can outsource willpower to good habits and good routines and good boundaries, it frees the mind from having to think about that, and you can just get on. Anyway, I don't know if that answers your question, but to me, the whole science of multitasking and attention is one of the most fascinating things we encountered when we were writing the book.
Yeah, no, that was actually kind of mind blowing. You just said, like, no, the more you multitask, the worse you get at it. Now, like, okay, so obviously, I think everybody here, first off, if you're one of the 2 people that's watching this live, I'm about to shame you. Sorry. No, I'm just kidding. I love you. But obviously, if you found your way to this channel, that means you're pretty deep into YouTube. So you probably know exactly what it's like to have your attention span just completely shot and ruined by technology. And, it's whenever you were talking about interruption potential, that is such a thing that resonates with me so much. And it wasn't necessarily my phone, but at one time I had a job where so much of it was dependent on an instant messaging system, and it was kind of expected that if somebody sends you an instant message, you need to be on it. Like, hey, you need to respond within 30 seconds, or else we're going to have a problem because you're unreachable, because it was the start of COVID, and they thought people were trying to be lazy. But one thing that I noticed that it did to me was that it was impossible for me to get into any sort of deep work, because I was always having to remain at this surface level, because every 2 minutes or so I was having to look over at my chat screen just to make sure that nobody's trying to reach out to me. And and I noticed that's a habit that sticks with me to this day, even though it's been years since I've worked for these people. And I guess that's one of my questions now, is it possible to recover that deep concentration, or have these devices ruined us?
Yeah, it is possible. The research shows that it is. The attention is like a muscle. When you use it, the more you use it, the more you practice single-minded focus, the stronger it becomes. And there are things people can do. There are exercises people can do to strengthen attention, mindfulness, meditation, forms of prayer, heart math. There's a lot of the boundaries that we already mentioned. Some of them help strengthen attention. I have to do that. I know exactly what. If I had a job where I had to be instantly available, it would drive me crazy. It's a weakness, but it's also a blessing, because I can't put myself in a situation like that, or I will get exhausted very quickly. And I even find it difficult to go into museums and art galleries, because there's just too much happening. And that I guess maybe that's not normal, because a lot of people like to be overstimulated, but for me, I have to protect my attention, or I get mental burnout. So I would not be able to have a job like that. And even you said you couldn't really get a lot of deep work done.
I'll just add anecdotally. I mean, I've noticed in cases when, I have successfully set up boundaries like that. And it could be something simple like I'm just gonna leave my smartphone in that other room, and I'm gonna go do something else. I'm gonna go pray. I'm gonna go read a book. I'm gonna go on a walk or something. No device on me. It experientially makes a difference. I mean, to a point where, again, speaking anecdotally, you can almost feel a physiological difference when you are unplugged, when you do not have, this potential distraction there. It doesn't matter whether there's an actual notification or whatever. It's there. Your, consciousness is kind of a little bit directed toward it, or it kind of puts you on the state of readiness. And so I would encourage, people to try that if that's something that is a challenge for them, to try to set up some of those kinds of boundaries and compartmentalizations, as you call it in the book, right? And you might be surprised to find that, that kind of there can be a kind of reverse engineering of, or reversal of the problem, right? That you're experiencing there.
Yeah, absolutely. And can I just say one more thing about this? And this is something maybe where our book is different from other books about digital minimalism. We actually encourage people to reverse this, and when you are doing activities online or on your phone, do that with your full attention as well. So social media, if you're spending time on Instagram or Facebook, Brian and I are both on Facebook. It's a great tool for being connected with people. I use Facebook for sharing photos with family members. It's just easier than emailing them all separately, and so forth. Not that we don't do that as well, but these tools can be rich ways to connect with people. You and I, we connected over
Right.
somebody else's Facebook post, but and similarly with YouTube, people, you can use these tools in an enriching way, which helps with flourishing. But do that with your full attention. So when you have your time, when you're on Facebook or Instagram or whatever, even Twitter, if you feel like that's within your goals for yourself, turn off everything else. Apply that same single-minded focus to whatever you're doing on the computer or the phone.
Are you trying to tell me I shouldn't have like 8 million tabs open on my browser at a given time? That I should
Listen, as a tech professional, that's unacceptable.
Good idea.
No, but I guess actually one thing that I'm hearing on this, and it's going to sound like a joke, but I'm being kind of serious. But it's like, if I'm going to do Facebook or Twitter while I'm at the house, shut the door, lock it, tell the kids to leave you alone. Which tells me, like, I don't know, that's one of those things that sounds horrible. It's like, yeah, and it kind of is. And if I was at home, I would never do that. I would never like tell the kids to keep it down and leave me alone. I'm scrolling Twitter. But sometimes, like while I'm sitting in the house and my kids are in the room, I am scrolling Twitter, and yet they still have basically the same amount of attention from me. And now I'm not doing anything well. I'm not reading the posts. I'm not engaging well, and I'm definitely not being a good father at that time. So, So, future Kyle here. During the interview, we ran into a bit of technical difficulties. So my internet gave out. So what I asked them to do is just to record some of their thoughts on technology and the impact on our children. So that's what you're going to see next year.
Well, so the thing with tech addiction for the younger generation is hard because we don't know. We're doing an experiment with our children that we don't know what the result is going to be, and I think that is irresponsible. You see children in strollers, and they're still in diapers, and they have iPhones, and I think there is starting to be an awareness. I'm starting to hear more and more similar to how like cigarettes were demonized. There's starting to be more awareness of this. So maybe we're going to see a large pushback. I mean, if you give your 2-year-old a cigarette, people are going to think you're a bad parent, and that kind of social pressure is very strong. So there could be a move like that with smartphones, and as more and more people, as digital addiction becomes recognized as an actual addiction clinically, there could be increasing social norms around parenting. But at the same time, the economic interests in consumer capitalism have such a push towards integrating digitality into every aspect of life, even with children. So I don't know what will win out. And in the one person who Mark Andreessen, who represents the kind of techno-utopian movement, and he's not mainstream. But he talks about a time when we quote him here in our book on technocracy. Every child will have an AI tutor that is infinitely patient, infinitely compassionate, infinitely knowledgeable, infinitely helpful. The AI tutor will be by each child's side every step of their development, helping them maximize their potential with the machine version of infinite love. And I mean, that's I could see. Yeah, I could.
Do you hear yourself right now? That sounds like a nightmare.
Oh boy.
Yeah, my 2 cents on this is, I think like what you said, Robin, about it being an addiction and about it being recognized as an addiction is such a huge point, because I mean, you could ask the same question about any addiction. Once you form an addiction, could you ever break it? And obviously people do find a way to break through a life defined by the addiction. And I think they'd probably be the first one to tell you that never 100% goes away either. There's a kind of, dedication and vigilance and starting anew each day that would have to happen in order to successfully live your life free of the addiction, right? So is it possible? Yes, it's possible. All things are possible by the grace of God, and the sorts of addictions that are formed even in a child or a teen are I think possible to be free of, or to sort of train yourself into new habits to come out of that. But forming habits when you're a kid is very different from forming habits when you're an adult. it's like, when the cement is still wet, you want to put the right formation into it. Once it's got hard, like you are going to have a much harder time. You're going to have to, to switch up maybe the imagery or the metaphor a little bit. You have to melt it down first and reshape it into something else before it can take that more settled form, right? There were even, philosophers who talked about this. I remember there's a passage in Aristotle where he talks about, he was so pessimistic about this. He said, once you formed habits as a child, he said he didn't see you ever breaking habits that you formed as a child as an adult.
By age 30, right?
Yeah, by age 30, right? So like, if you had not formed virtuous habits by then, you're screwed. I don't think we have to take that pessimistic review, but I think he's speaking to the weight of the kinds of habits that we form and the immense sort of struggle and sort of the how you as a how all your current habits would have to be broken down and reshaped and remolded over a long and hard and arduous period of time in order to do that. So I think that's the future we would be giving our children if we just say, well, they'll grow out of it and we can just let them go on their way and form this addiction to smartphones and other technology.
Yeah, and so the solution to this is boundaries and good habits, good lifestyle in the home. There has to be, with children, you have to show them a better way, something that's more beautiful. And the church at the center, a life spent outdoors with creativity and imagination, healthy relationships in the home, reading and audiobooks and reading out loud. These, by pointing to something higher and more beautiful, that's the best way to treat addictive or pre-addictive behaviors, rather than just no. Of course, you have to have boundaries. You have to tie yourself to the mast, like Odysseus did. But that's not sufficient.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, something else I'd add is, I know, Robin, you have some kids who are grown. My kids are just kind of entering sort of the preteen era and whatnot. And something that I'm noticing about my own parenting is how much things are shifting from, like when they're very young, it can be very focused on sort of, obedience and like obey, don't touch the hot stove, get your shoes on, we're going out the door sort of thing. As they're growing older, I'm finding that, my relationship with my kids is very different. I mean, this sort of authority that I have over them, yes, there is an element of like, obedience and respect and things like that, but it's so much more relies on this currency of, there needs to be an actual personal relationship and personal connection, because person is maturing into, they're not an adult yet, but they're maturing into who they will become as an adult. And so you need to have a genuine heart-to-heart relationship with your kid. Doesn't mean you're their friend or whatever, right? Like some kind of hands-off parent, but it does mean that you need to have that genuine personal and heart-to-heart relationship with them. As a way of helping influence them, and because if they're going to take your advice seriously, they have to take you seriously to a certain extent, and that's going to be so much more than just, you can't just come in with an iron fist and be like, present this image of super, negativity, I guess, yeah. Right? And you talk about that a little bit in the book. It's like you don't want a family environment where it's entirely focused on the negative and entirely focused on this is all bad, it's going to kill you, it's it's all terrible and toxic. You need to, as Robin said, connect with them, right? You need to be spending time together as a family, talking with each other, listening to each other, sharing your lives, playing games, interacting with each other, and show them this beautiful life that is so much better than just doom scrolling on a social media app, right? And that's going to be attractive. People, we are going to be hardwired to love beauty when we see it, and so we need to provide those opportunities for our kids.
Amen. That's a great summary of the approach that we've tried to convey. So there we go.